I've sort of had for a while, and the question in general just is, are valve amps or tube amps too loud now for normal use? Feel like for some reason, certainly in the last few years, it's become a thing that people, people at venues, all of this sort of stuff are of the idea that a silent stage-ish should be possible, or that bands should be able to be, quite quiet or unreasonably quiet. This has become a thing more and more, and I feel like guitarists of today are paying for the sins of guitarists past. So obviously in the days of cranked plexis and stuff, you can imagine, or maybe that's still happening even, but those kind of ear-piercing volumes must have taken their toll on sound people to the point where they now want you as a guitarist to not really have any stage volume. Let me know, is that your experience at all? I know in churches, I think it's quite common to be taking just a modeler these days, and in-ear systems and stuff. These have their benefits for sure, but equally for me, I quite like the idea of still having an amp on stage. And the gigs where I have done that, and then I see footage from outside, whether it's the sound guy who actually likes guitar players, who's taken a video, that stuff tends to sound like the guitar is way more prominent. And to me, when I've seen gigs without guitar amps on stage, oftentimes I think, where is the guitar? So when I saw Sleep Token live, for example, I think they're using either a Kemper or a Quad Cortex, but you get this this is supposed to be like a rock/metal gig, but all I can hear really is bass, vocals, and a lot of snare drum, and not much guitar at all. So for me, the question there is fairly what's going on? So obviously for home use, we're all used to the idea that probably things like a Vox AC30 are not going to get a ton of use unless you're using pedals or attenuators. Similarly, some kind of, if you're looking for cranked Fender tones, any of these sorts of things, something like a Fender Champ, when you start to get those volume knobs past about 5, to get any kind of breakup, those things are still, I find, too loud for home use. You have the Marshall studio amps that are like 20 watts. And again, it's the same thing for me, because a lot of Marshall kind of drive and saturation comes from the power amp section. By the time you're, pushing the master volume up and the drive up to try and get these things to that kind of classic Marshall tone, they're, I find, way too loud for home use as well. And then the other thing is, I think there is a downside to using load boxes and using attenuators, and that is the additional strain they put on tubes, right? So I think probably most of us are aware that the louder you turn up a tube amp, is this true? I think this is true. The harder the tubes start to work, right? If you've got your power amp section cranked to get that kind of tube saturation, and you've got it going through a load box, I feel like you're more likely to have your amp turned up to loud than you would in real life without that load box. I was talking to Jake about this the other day, and he was thinking, yeah, there's no way I'd have these two rocks kind of cranked to the level that I have them through the UA aux box. So there's that to think about. Are you aging your amps more or quicker, or the tubes of your amps quicker, by using these load boxes and stuff? So I think there's a little bit of a solution to this, and it is to use amps that have more high gain options on tap. So for instance, like a Vox, at home volumes, you can't really get much gain out of those things at all. I've had one on the channel, the 64 Vox from Gary, up the road, Gary. And, I could turn that up to about 3 or 4, and it was ear-splittingly loud and totally clean as a whistle. Now, conversely, I've got Mesa Boogie amps, which you can turn the master volume down on them, and I think this is similar with a Dumble design to some extent. Robin Ford says this about his Dumble designs. It's kind of his ODS for sure. I think I've read somewhere that it doesn't really make too much difference to the kind of core tone where you've got that master volume set, because a lot of the magic of whatever's happening is in the preamp section. So I don't know if this is universally the case, but like a Fender Champ has way less tubes in it than a Mesa Boogie of any form, really. And so what I find is that with the Boogie stuff, you can have it at a sensible volume like I do now, like it's kind of... that's kind of cranked Marshall amounts of gain, but the volume is like speaking volume, a bit louder than shouting volume. So like that, where you've got enough gain on the amp, or enough preamps, enough preamp tweakability, I feel like that might be the solution to the amp which isn't too loud for most things, because you're not having to crank the actual power amp to get the amount of gain that you're looking for, and therefore you maybe don't have to get fired from the gig, and maybe you don't have to disturb your neighbours too much to get what I think are quite kind of cool saturated tones. Maybe Mesa Boogie's the answer to everything. I think Friedman have master volumes on their amps, but is a non-master volume amp now too loud for most things? That's kind of the question. Let me know your thoughts. Have you got a way around this? I think some people put a screen in front of their amps on stage as well, but then in that case you're kind of losing some of that, what you even took the real amp for, I feel. Are you still a person who's like, well, this is just the volume that I have to play at, or have you had to compromise on this stuff? Of course, the elephant in the room is the drummer, because they're always quite loud, I find. And what I find quite unpleasant when I see videos of bands and stuff is that you get a lot of stage volume from a drum kit, unless they're behind a screen, and you don't really hear anything else except for vocals, and I find that quite jarring to be involved with when I have to play on a stage like that. But it's something you can get through. But also if you see like video taken from the band, it's just drums and a bit of vocal. It just sounds a bit weird to me, so I'm not sure if that's really as rocking as it could be. But some stage volume has got to be okay, right? And if that is the case, then this kind of thing where you've got a master volume on your amp and you've got an amp which is designed to give you a lot of preamp gain variability, I think might be the way to go, where you don't necessarily have to make everyone in the band cry to get adequate levels of gain or beyond. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are we paying for the sins of our fathers? The guys that turned up and they cranked their JTM 45s to 7 and drowned out the drummer. Is that what we're now having to deal with? Are we paying reparations? No, it's a bad idea. Are we paying the price for the mistakes that those guys made? Probably quite a lot of them are deaf now. Let me know your thoughts. Did you used to gig super loud? Have you taken your volume down? Is that amp too loud? Or are there ways around this? Is it more about you being versatile as a player, or is it about having a sound person that is not super set in their ways? What I found is the bands themselves don't tend to mind. In the bands that I've played in, like, because I'm not blasting the volume too much, you've got to be like, I think, a bit careful with this stuff. If you crank your amp too loud, then no one else can hear anything. So for me, cranking is definitely not an option, but some level of stage volume should be okay, right? Let me know your thoughts. Cheers. Off to gig.